Hello again, returning once more to the Cyberpunk type build, where I'm slowly putting together an entire board's worth of a futuristic city, about 50-50 Megacity 1 and Cyberpunk. To begin with, I blocked out the form using foam core and insulation board, and I messed up a little this time, as there's quite a big gap between the two floors. So to cover that, I overlap the insulation board on the cladding, and make sure it goes over the gap. Grabbing some styrofoam and beveling the edges slightly, make a nice little foundational block, and you can also carve kind of slabs into it, or leave it as a longer piece. Here you can see where one side has a larger gap than the other, so taking a long strip of the underfloor insulation board, putting glue on one end, so it will overlap and hang down over the crack. Taking a steel rule and a scalpel, I then carved out the door frame, making sure it was wide enough for two 20mm bases side by side. Then I wanted to have it in a bit of an alcove, so I attached a strip either side of the door, and a larger slab atop, before adding a few more details on the edge of the building to break up the squareness of it, such as some beveled pieces to go on the top and cover the edge between the foam core and the other board. To make some pipes, I used some bamboo skewers, using a jeweler's saw to get the initial cut before snipping it off and tidying up the edges with some clippers. Using a small bit of matte Mod Podge to attach them to the walls. To fill some of the gaps, I took some old polyfiller, which is probably a little bit past its best, but the crumbly aesthetic seems to work fine. So I'm mixing it up so it's a bit more smooth, then smearing it onto the gaps between the boards. Once that had dried, I primed the entire thing in black gesso. To create frames for some external features, I took some plastic rods, trimmed them down to size, then glued them together, so later these can be external framing, neon sign support, billboards, all that kind of fun stuff. To paint the majority of the walling, I took a sponge made out of old packaging foam that I tore a piece off, and started sponging on a light beige colour, so you get a nice textured, concretey effect. Then taking pure white paint, I stippled that onto the areas of the foam core, so you get a plaster effect. It'll all be grimed up later anyway, so it's okay if there's a bit of overlap. Then to cover any of the really bad looking bits, I took some EVA foam, cut one of the corners off, then glued it into place, which is a useful way to quickly cover up any unsightly gaps. For more external piping, I took some pieces of hobby wire and glued it onto the front. To add some very quick and easy greebles, I took some of these kind of bedazzle beads, which are nice square ones, which I pre-painted, and then pressed them onto the outside. Then to cover the corners, which I think are probably the worst looking part, took some more EVA foam and curved it round, so you'd get a very kind of makeshift looking cladding that they'd applied onto the edge of the building. Jumping back over to the external frames, I primed most of those using black gesso. While that dried, I applied some seafoam green to the EVA foam, so you get a nice splash of colour. Taking very watered down black paint, I also applied a wash over most of the areas of concrete, so it would bring a bit of the deeper details out and darken the paint down some. To try something new with the graffiti, I went for a kind of two-tone black outline. So I looked up a few reference examples online, and then blocked out most of them using a black tip pen, leaving a few areas of white so you can go on over the top with a different colour. So it makes quite a striking two-tone image. I did find I had to go in again with a finer tip pen and just touch up a few of the details. But it's meant to be weathered and worn anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Grabbing some more bamboo skewers, I decided I wanted a kind of communication tower on top, maybe some kind of radar thing. So trimming a bunch of them down to size and keeping one of them longer, I started gluing them together so you'd have a multiple piece antenna. I then took a styrofoam block, carved it into shape, and then impaled it using the skewer tip. So it would have a kind of concrete stand that would blend into the top of the building. To add a bit more detail, I took some half beads and some EVA foam, and attached a few strips and beads up the length, so you'd have kind of a focus for whatever signal they're getting or sending out. This then got added to the pile of greebles to be primed with black gesso. I also added a panel using a square bead and a wire made out of an old guitar string. I then painted up the various detail pieces. So the neon sign got a coat of white paint, and the frames got a coat of silver. To create the front door, I took a single piece of EVA foam and a piece of a block of foam core, trimmed it down slightly, then applied a few details using various pieces of EVA foam and some of the adhesive beads. Everything felt way too clean at this point, so taking a burnt umber paint, I stippled it onto the metal framework. Then once happy with that, I watered it down and used it as a light wash so I could apply a grime into the corners and the edges of the building. As this is more of a watery mix, it takes a bit longer to dry, and it's good to make sure it is completely dry before you move on. So it's a great time to go back onto the little greebly things. So I finish up the sign by applying a layer of bright green paint to it. To create a very easy door handle, I took a paper clip, trimmed it down to size, and then curved it into a C shape, before taking a needle tool and stabbing 2 holes into the EVA foam. This has the added benefit of you can then impale it into the wall and get a bit more stability from it. I used a similar technique to make a basketball hoop. Then glued one of the frames into place on the roof, on the slant, so it could hold some solar panels, which I made from a metallic textured piece of card, which got a quick layer of watered down black gesso over the top. After gluing the neon sign onto another piece of frame, I took some more of the green paint and put some overflow onto the frame behind it so you get a bit of a natural glow effect. By now the solar panels had dried, so taking some matte Mod Podge, I then glued them onto the frame, with the obligatory one that's falling off on the edge. Rather than doing posters and stuff by hand this time, I acquired a printer and quickly knocked up some posters, using Mod Podge to glue them onto the outside, and overlapping the graffiti and the other posters so it looks a bit more natural and clustered I realised here that the roof was way too dangerous to play basketball on, so it needed a safety rail made out of some bamboo skewers and some styrofoam, which then got primed up and blended into the existing paint scheme. With that blended in, it was complete, so I added a lean-to I'd made from another build on top. It's not glued on, so I can just move it around. And yeah, another big building for the Cyberpunk board, which is slowly getting there. Although I think next I need to do some smaller buildings, so I have something in between, and something at a different height level. Placing it with the other buildings, you can already see it's kind of coming together, and you can see the vibe I'm trying to go for. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to catch you next time. Bye.